to go, Cal? You good? Kia ora.
Are we going like
Look at
this?
that. Now we've got some people, Bixie coming in.
Let's do this.
Welcome along. Welcome to tonight's panel discussion for the Flea Ototahi Street Art Festival 2025. For those who don't know me, I'm Ruben Woods. I'll be your host tonight. It's a privilege and a pleasure to spend the next little while in conversation with this fantastic lineup of artists who have both travelled short distances and further distances to be part of this festival. We're going to discuss their experiences and backgrounds and obviously the works they've produced here in and for Ototahi. But before I introduce each of the artists sitting on stage, on behalf of ARC and Watch the Space, I want to just acknowledge a number of our supporters who've helped make Flea possible. So obviously the sponsors that you may have seen, the likes of Dulux, Lime Scooters, Rinley's, the FSA crew, Riverside Markets, Colliers, the Drifter, Christchurch City Council, ASB, Railside, Phantom Bill Stickers, Gordon Harris, Access Man, and of course tonight's venue, the Duck Central as well. It's testament really to the support of the local street art movement that we've had such a litany of contributors to help make this festival possible. In addition, of course, I also want to thank the ground team of the festival, led by the indefatigable Selena Faimalo, who is possibly by day 7 or 8 looking a little bit fatigued, but she's done an amazing job pulling this together and keeping everyone on track. And of course, the rest of the team, Decipher, Kofi, Local Elements, Droz, Icarus, Laurent, Centuri, Ali, and all the volunteers who've helped out over the last week as well. So anyone who I may have missed, a massive thank you to you as well, and including Corbin, who's running our live stream tonight as well. Quick health and safety spiel. Toilets are over here, right at the front, so it's good you get to walk up in front of everybody just to go to the toilet. And obviously, in the event of an emergency, we'll evacuate down the stairs here out to the car parks outside and just follow any instructions that you may be given by the Ducks staff. And remember to wear your high vis and a respirator. Oh no, sorry, that's for you guys when you're painting murals. Sorry, dad joke. So, tonight, though, is a chance to hear from perhaps the most important people involved in Flea, of course, the artists. And we're fortunate enough to have on stage 5 fantastic artists. We do have 4 artists who we would have loved to have had presence, but for various reasons they're unable to be here tonight. So we want to acknowledge and thank Isek, Nick Lowry, Jacob Yikes, and Drez as well, who have all contributed amazing works to the festival. And obviously you'll be able to see those works in person, but also find out more about them as people, as artists, via the sort of website and social media as well. Which brings me to the beginning and an introduction of each of these amazing people on stage. So sitting directly next to me here is Kairo Haza Bradley, a Māori artist of Ngāpuhi descent, born and raised in the western suburbs of Auckland, Aotearoa. After decades of dedication to the urban canvases and 10 years navigating the corporate space of the design world, Haza now occupies a full-time art practice. He's one of a handful of artists at the forefront of the graffiti and street art scene in New Zealand, with over 20 years of contribution to the graffiti community, representing and exhibiting at international events throughout Australasia, North America, Asia, Middle East, Europe, and the UK. Haza's work reflects a lifetime of exploring the limits and boundaries of the alphabet in the context of graffiti. These studies have manifested into a post-graffiti narrative which illustrates a story of his fear of love, a place for his people, and hope for a better world. Similar to Haza's works on the urban canvas, his studio works carry the same signature, saturated colour palette, and are represented by bold graffiti-inspired motifs. You're also, if we pass the mic down, can we grab the mic? I'd love you to be able to sort of say something about yourself as well, rather than just that pre-written spiel. So maybe just a quick introduction that doesn't repeat exactly what I've just said.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for having me, having the rest of the artists as well. Yeah, very privileged to continue to be doing something that I started when I was a kid. Obviously, the morals and values when I was a teenager are a little bit different now. But just through perseverance and resilience, I've stayed true to my path as an artist. So I'm very grateful, and these are the results, I think, of some of those sacrifices.
Awesome. Thank you, Heza. We'll come back. Don't worry. That's not the end of hearing from Heza. Next to Heza is Fluoro. Fluoro is an artist and designer whose work is primarily based around words and letter forms and combines the influences of graffiti, typography, design, and signwriting. She enjoys the conceptual problem-solving aspect of design and takes a similar approach to the walls she paints. The message is key, words are weapons, and public walls are an opportunity to speak to people. While most of her work involves painting on walls, Fluoro loves exploring a variety of media and is interested in finding ways to make her work light up wherever possible. Holly, do you want to say hi?
Hi.
And next to Holly is the famous Dr. Bobby Hung, Burst. A graffiti writer based in Tamaki Makaurau and known under the name Burst. He has been painting graffiti for 20 years and involved in a range of community-centred projects with youth and visual arts education in the tertiary sector. His painting practice involves the production of large-scale aerosol works in public spaces through the exploration of letter-based works. Parallel to art making, Burst holds a PhD in education from the University of Auckland and has intersecting practices with illustration, oral history and documentation, and curation. His list of accolades includes a second place award at the International Onu'u Graffiti Competition in Tahiti, a Guinness World Record for the world's longest graffiti scroll completed in Dubai. I think actually was that alongside Decipher? Were you part of that as well? Yeah. Nice. Two world record holders in the room. And a recipient of the Unitec Taipei Artist Village Residency Program. Which of those is your proudest accomplishment?
Kia ora, everybody. Maybe not the proudest, but the proudest might actually be becoming a father.
I was going to say
that's always the most rewarding.
Come on, that was a trick question, so you passed that. Yeah, well done. So next to Burst is Jessie Rawcliffe. Jessie is a multidisciplinary artist, designer and muralist based in Ōtautahi, Christchurch, New Zealand. Her paintings are often recognisable for their figurative realism that differs from traditional portraiture as it aims to shift the power dynamic from the viewer to the subject. She pairs contrary visual elements and styles and themes such as positive and negative space, detail and obscurity, permanence and impermanence to emphasise an ephemeral moment or emotion. Now, I think I've got the year right. Was it 2022 that you were highly commended in the Adam Portraiture Award? Yep, we'll go with 2022. Jessie has held exhibitions at the Centre of Contemporary Art and completed commissions for the likes of New Zealand Opera and was a featured artist in the inaugural Little Street Art Festival. And I think the question to start for you, Jessie, is how's Max?
Max is my dog, by the way. I don't know. He was in the slideshow before.
He was?
Max is good. I probably could have brought him, but he would have been a bit of a nuisance. Yeah. But yeah, you about covered it.
Yeah. And next to Jessie, last but by no means least, is Ling. Ling is has come the furthest, all the way from Melbourne. And is a Melbourne-based artist, but is born in Dunedin, so has his roots here in New Zealand, Aotearoa. He shifted across to Australia at the age of 6, but has maintained that, and in fact his parents are based in Ringiora, so a nice strong connection. A founding member of the Safe House Studio and currently working from the renowned Everfresh Studio, Ling has been adding colour and vibrancy to his environment since the year 2000. Known for producing large-scale installations, Ling looks to combine the aesthetics of traditional graffiti with an impressionistic approach to painting, utilising heavy brushstrokes, textures and a deft touch with aerosols, resulting in bold designs with the consideration of studio work and an immediacy synonymous with graffiti. Ling continues to develop his studio practice, increasingly exploring alternative creative avenues. From his ongoing conceptual series, The Allure of Gold, through to sculptural installations that utilise industrial processes, this willingness to try new things and explore the unknown ensures there is always something new on the horizon. Ling is featured in the World Atlas of Street Art, edited by Lachlan McDowell and Raphael Schachter, alongside some very impressive names, a well-earned spot in that publication. Ling, do you want to say hello in Australian?
How much am I allowed to swear?
As is appropriate for an Australian, right? That's a lot.
I'm not going to do it. But g'day. It's good to be here.
Perfect. So that's a very formal introduction of these 5 artists. The goal tonight, or the aim tonight, is of course to be much more conversational. So they've probably just eye rolled and found that a very awkward experience to have that long sort of biography read out. So we're going to change it up, and we're going to be a little bit more, I guess, informal. So I wanted to start by getting to know each of you a little bit more by asking you some specific questions. And I want to start again with Hazza. So if we can just pass the mic back down. So Hazza, you have grown up with a strong connection to your Māori heritage and identity. How did graffiti enter your worldview and your experience? And what has led to your work, I guess, increasingly exploring the contemporization of toi Māori within your distinctive style that encapsulates or captures that graffiti influence?
Yeah, I think I'm a product of my environment. I grew up in the western suburbs of Auckland. A lot of trouble out there, so naturally I gravitated towards that. But I also grew up as an artist that was, my dad was an artist, so art was always around me. And graffiti was a way for me to funnel a lot of what was going on in my life and allow me to govern the adrenaline levels that I had as a teenager. And I just found this, as much as it's a chaotic world, a safe space in this world. And then you meet kind of like-minded people from all different walks of life, and you sort of build a community around it. And you do it long enough, and you realize that it's a world phenomenon, but it's still such a small culture. So to have a presence in this culture is very much an honor, and particularly in New Zealand, but even on a global scale. So that's a very short way of, kind of how I got into graffiti. But I think in recent times there's been the inclusion of toi Māori in my work. This is something that I never thought that I would do. I grew up immersed in Māori culture and made a transition into Western culture in high school. That's kind of all the people that I looked up to, which were all the people that had cars and parties. I kind of wanted to assimilate to that life, and so kind of I abandoned this part of my life. But when I look back, it's kind of given me perspective from both sides. And I've never really worried about my identity because I grew up in my hapu. And I'm very connected to where I'm from. I still go there a lot, so I've never felt this need to sort of project how Māori I was, because I can just go home whenever I needed to. But in saying that, I moved to the UK, and it was the first time I realised that this is not where I belong, which is a small rural town in the far north. And it hit me. I was like, this is where I belong. So it kind of started this journey of self-discovery all over again, and I just started to funnel these Māori motifs through the lens of my graffiti. And it just started out as little drawings, but I think over time, and particularly with what's going on in this country at the moment, a lot of the problems that we're facing, I just felt this need to develop a voice to sort of project, that there's more of us out here. And what I realized was that this, through pushing an indigenous culture through an urban lens, it enabled me to reach a community that sort of wasn't being reached yet, and that is a lot of our rangatahi who are distanced from their culture, whether they've been pulled from it or whether they just have no care for it. Either way, they're not connected to it. So it's put me in this space, I think, which I didn't really see myself in, but just through being honest with where I'm at in my journey, I think this is where I need to be.
Yeah. And how much, I sort of mentioned the contemporization process. How much have you drawn in that exploration from traditional toi, the I guess the broad material aspects, because you've got this very strong graphic linear quality to your work, which I imagine a lot of that comes from that graffiti background, right, and the flow of the line. Yeah. Did you think about how that relates to those traditional material approaches in toi Māori?
But I also didn't want to be another person that was making traditional toi Māori. I'm quite happy with where they're at, and I still consider them masters in their craft, but I'm also a master in my craft. So I think I needed to acknowledge that in myself and start to see the parallels between those two cultures and where I could sort of connect the dots. And you know, I like all of our stories. I like our tupuna stories. I like, you know, the stories that my parents tell me about my grandparents. But at some point, I want to make sure that our stories are being told.
Yeah, which is, and as you've touched on, I think it's such a vital undertaking in today's current sort of political climate, right? Like there's a lot going on where that's such an important direction. It's such an important sort of undertaking for as you say, the exemplification for future generations coming up. And
this is not where I thought I would be. I didn't pick up a can when I was a teenager to think that I would to help people. But I think the further you move on in life and the more you look in your rearview mirror and sort of see where you can help, I think you have to take it upon yourself to make those steps and create those changes. Yeah,
and we sort of touched on in one of our conversations during the week about that is more about the path that you can strike than necessarily kind of like a mentorship, right? Like it's about exemplification, I guess, as much as anything. Like showing people the wake that you can allow them to follow in, as opposed to necessarily this is how you do it. You're saying this is how I've done it, and it's sort of, you know, like you can then follow from that. Is that the way that you see it?
Yeah, it's the power of influence. And as I mentioned before, you know, don't be confused with an influencer. You know, to influence is to trailblaze, and to trailblaze means to take the brunt of all the force in front of you. Which means, but in the process of that, you leave a wake behind you, and you know that allows people to follow through those steps, and they can get off wherever they want when they decide this is their stop. But it shouldn't stop you. I think if you're in a position to move in this direction, then you need to take it. And yeah, this is just where I've found myself, and this is where I feel comfortable. Well, actually, it's very uncomfortable, to be honest. It's a very intimidating space to be in, but change is not made being comfortable.
And we're going to come back to that, because that is something I think that's a really important and valid point. But we will come back to that. So hold that thought and hold that thought out there. Because I just want to ask Holly a couple of questions. Because one of the things I didn't mention in the bio... one thing I didn't mention in your bio is that, of course, you were born and raised here in Ōtautahi. This is kind of a homecoming of sorts, right? Not that you've not been back. You're a regular visitor coming back home. But how special does it make being part of this festival, being in your hometown and the chance to come and paint a large-scale work here? Does it, you know, how meaningful is that for you?
Yeah, no, it actually, I mean, it's always a privilege to be invited to something like this, an event like this. Especially, I don't always feel like I deserve it in a way, but I really appreciate it. And yeah, especially here, I think I am here like quite a lot, and my family's here, and I think the more I come back, I'm like, it still really feels like home. I don't feel at home anywhere else, really. Like I've lived in a bunch of different cities in New Zealand, and I don't know them so well. And I mean, I love Auckland too, but it does feel like home, and it's special to like have something here. My family can appreciate, my friends can, you know, it definitely has a different meaning to it. Yeah.
In terms of when you're painting a work in a place that is familiar, like your hometown, does that change the way that you sort of consider a concept or a design, or is your work quite able to adapt to different environments? I mean, do you think differently, I guess, around a mural work when it's here as opposed to somewhere else, or is it all part of a continuum for you?
Yeah, I don't think it's different necessarily, but there's a lot more context to it because I know this place better. Even if I don't even if it's subconscious, I think there's a lot more context. There's a lot more, like a meal that has lots more ingredients. There's just these different things that go into it that are meaningful to me. And I'm not always, I don't think I'm actually necessarily aware of them or like could explain them, but it's just a different, I guess it's like a richer meal, if that's the analogy, then
I really like that as a metaphor. A meal with lots more ingredients and flavors and stuff like that you may not notice, but they're there, and it's comforting, right? And it's sort of warming in a way. I guess the other thing is, I mean, you were still living here post-quake and then have sort of been back. Coming back now, how unique has it been to come back to the city in those sort of interim periods and kind of see and feel the changes? Because that's the most marked thing about this city is change. And I mean, this event probably wouldn't be taking place if it hadn't been for the earthquakes, in terms of the sea change around urban creativity that's taken place. Do you sort of take time to reacclimatise every time you come back now because the change is so marked?
Yeah, I think I guess it's cool to see all the changes. It's like always growing, and I kind of wondered like when the city had become more re-established and like more buildings went up and there were like lots of new buildings, if it would lose a lot of like the kind of creativity or the kind of rawness to that had been kind of established after the earthquake. I wondered if it would lose that, but it's really cool to see that the city has like embraced art and creativity and change and kind of whatever, but on like it's embedded in the city now. It's like a long-term thing rather than just that happened and then the city's rebuilt and it's been like it's instead of that it's really grown, and I feel like it's a leading the way in New Zealand for that. So.
And don't worry, this is not another question, it's more of a statement. You have you've played a big part in that. You were one of the organisers alongside Jacob and Leah of the first real street art festival in the city, from the ground up, which was in 2013. So there should be massive pride in the role that you've played, and now coming back over 10 years later for this festival, there's a nice quality to that. So I think it's an acknowledgement there of your role and work.
Thanks, Ruben.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll move on to Burst. So I've split because you're probably just as used to being in this seat, right, with the microphone and asking questions. You are the foremost, I guess, sort of documentarian and advocate for graffiti culture in Aotearoa. You have both the artistic and the academic bona fides and all of that kind of thing. And I guess, what I wanted to ask you about in terms of your background was that initial spark of graffiti art. You said, and this is not a direct quote, but you were sort of saying the other day that you didn't necessarily grow up particularly outstanding at anything, but you found graffiti and that became a compulsion. So do you want to talk a little bit about how graffiti came to be in your life and what that initial encounter led to that's got you now to this position as a, as you're known as Dr. Burst, the encyclopedia, the man of graffiti in New Zealand.
Self-appointed name. Self-appointed. Look, I mean, when I think about my early days in graffiti, that started at high school. And what you were talking about, Ruben, just then was, I guess, my lack of interest in school. I wasn't good at anything in the academic space, wasn't good at sports, and actually wasn't even good at art. But somehow I discovered graffiti through the language of tagging, and that's kind of what all of my friends were doing at the time. And initially I thought that was like the stupidest thing ever, tagging on people's property, and like, why would you do that? That's so bad. And then, yeah, kind of as a joke, I did it. And then one night I snuck out of the house. I don't even know how I got the spray paint, but I snuck out, and then I just, on a school night, and then I just thrashed this main road, which is like the bus route to school. Yeah. And yeah, no idea what I was doing, you know, just literally tagging on everything. And then the next day I just recall, you know, hanging out with my friends at lunchtime, and they'd be like, oh, who's this burst guy? He's everywhere. I was like, you know, I'm just kind of in the background. I'm like, it's me. And they're like, oh, lies, that's not you. I'm like, yeah, that's me. And then just like, for some reason, there was this affirmation, I guess, from, you know, it's a psychological thing, from my peers. Whereas, you know, and you got to just remember for one moment that at this point in time, you know, when I talk about not being good in academia or sports or anything, I went to Auckland Boys Grammar, and the way that they what's the word, rate you, I don't know, is they've got, you know, yeah, there's a hierarchy, you know, if you're third form, fourth form, fifth form, whatever, they've got an A class, a B class, a C. I was all the way down in K, you know, and then, you know, as I got to fourth form, fifth form, I dropped down to M, you know, and it's just this like weird system that's like telling you you're stupid, you know, that's the kind of feeling, you know. In some ways you could argue that that's like a way to motivate you to, you know, work harder, but for me it was just like, oh, I'm an M, or so anyway, getting some affirmation from my friends, you know, that's, you know, it was like, oh, what's this weird feeling? And then, yeah, from there, started meeting other people that, you know, kind of went beyond the tagging part. And then I think the main thing really that really pushed me into getting involved with graffiti was going along the train lines of Tamaki Makaurau. And basically at that time, and this is like during the early 2000s, there's basically graffiti, you know, like everywhere, kind of what you might imagine you would see here in Christchurch. But the work that I saw was just of like such a high caliber. I'm just thinking, like, as a teenager, how is it possible that there's people going onto the train tracks, which, you know, seems like a dangerous place, which it is, and people are painting these pieces of work at nighttime. They're super technical, they're colorful, you know, like, how is this, what is this, you know, visual language that I'm seeing, you know, and this hidden language that, you know, nobody understands. So I was just really intrigued by that. And then, of course, the curiosity grew deeper as the internet became more accessible, and then you're starting to see internet forums and things, and people globally sharing work, and then you're like, oh my God, that's happening in LA and like Asia or whatever. It's just like, it's a global thing, you know, and it's, since seeing that and then meeting the people as well, that, yeah, really propelled me into that went beyond the kind of affirmation part and actually really wanting to learn about graffiti and then become good at it. And, you know, from that, you know, in a nutshell, to the large-scale murals that we kind of see in the public these days. Yeah.
So you touch on something that I'm always fascinated about, and that is, I guess, the ability of graffiti to be both inherently political and inherently artistic. So you talked about the sort of affirmation that you gained when you started entering the world of getting up or of tagging. When did you start to sort of, I guess, see graffiti as a politicized statement? You know, and I say that in terms of the personal being political, right? It's about identity, it's about presence, it's about non-conformity in a way. It's got a lot of these sort of aspects. When did you start to see that aspect of it and see it as a subject that was ripe for, I guess, sort of a deeper discourse?
Yeah. Look, I mean, like I said, when I first got into it, I wasn't good at art. But what I think along my career or, you know, lifetime so far is that I did go study art school, at art school. And so I guess I had this understanding of the art world, in terms of the fine art world, because I, also did portrait paintings. I was working with oil paints and things like that. So I had that kind of traditional training, but then having that kind of parallel, which I think you're going to touch on at some point, this informal training, informal education from the streets, literally. I was just constantly kind of gravitated towards that, because for me, I think one thing that makes graffiti quite a special art movement, perhaps compared to other art movements, is that kind of rebellious nature of it. Often it's illegal, that the tools, it's a lot of it's DIY. And most importantly, I think it speaks a lot to your identity and finding a voice for yourself. When you think back to me as a person not having an identity, or not being acknowledged per se, I think I just found graffiti as a way to express myself, and in some cases, it's more of in a vandalistic way. That's kind of how it started, but now it's more of an artistic way. So I also think that why a lot of young people are interested in graffiti is because that's the language they choose to express themselves, and just so happens it's illegal, but it's just something that can't be taken away from them, So yeah, definitely in terms of the identity part, that's kind of how I have found myself, and yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So there was a second part to the question, and that's the formal side, that flip side. Yeah. So then you've touched on this, that your art school training, but what's your sort of, I guess, your worldview on the formal qualities of graffiti? How would you break down graffiti as a visual art form formally?
You mean visually?
Yeah, visually. So what are the defining visual elements, and
yeah.
what aspects, I think, do people perhaps overlook
Sure.
when they're thinking about that from that visual context? Because it's easy to think, right, that when we say graffiti as an art form, we're thinking about the higher levels, right?
Sure.
But in fact, there's an art form to a tag, there's an art form to a throw up, there's all these things. So, for you, with all of your sort of expertise, I guess, how do you break down the key formal elements of graffiti as a visual language?
So for the people that are not familiar with what graffiti is, or have more of a limited understanding of what it is, there is generally kind of four categories, visual categories that I would probably break them down to. One being the tag. That's typically something that's done in a couple of seconds. It's maybe a scribble. It's their signature, right? The next thing people would do is a thing called a throw up. In a literal sense, you're kind of throwing it up really quickly. That's usually done quite quickly as well. And the style of that is a bit more in the vein of like a bubble style kind of lettering. There's a bit more curves and there's kind of a bit of form to it. And the third thing I would say, category, is piecing, or short for masterpiece. And that term kind of derives from the 1960s in New York, when the kids were painting subway trains and things, they would call their work a masterpiece, and then eventually it's kind of just been truncated to a piece. But that's probably what a lot of you guys see maybe in the public space, and that's usually a bit more technical. People might spend hours or days, on something. It's a bit larger in scale. There's more colors. And then maybe the fourth category is a thing that we call a production, which is typically involves more than one person, and there's a person maybe painting some pieces, some lettering, and also some pictures, maybe a character or something. And then what accompanies that might also be a specific color palette that people use. There may be a theme, and the overall wall is a bit more unified, and usually larger in scale as well. So those would be the main four categories potentially, but there's many different other kind of approaches to graffiti, but I would say that's the core.
So they're your sort of core
elements
or layers, but then if you then try and define more broadly within graffiti its essence, right? Its visual formal essence.
Yep.
What would you break that down to? Is it the I guess a sense of flow? Is it segmentation? Like how would you define a key essence visually of graffiti art?
I think that question, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said something very specific. But I think after so long now, the graffiti world has changed, and maybe along a continuum, I would say that when we're looking at the 1960s, graffiti, lettering, people would typically say, letters have to have funk and flow, and, those terms kind of come from hip-hop, from things like breakdancing, b-boying, b-girling, and it's got to have flow, it's got to have movement, and I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but there's that. But also I think what we're kind of seeing now with a lot of different graffiti artists is that they're breaking that mold, and you're really seeing a lot of graffiti artists starting to come from so many different backgrounds. You've got people that are painting lettering as still their kind of core shapes and forms and color, but they're coming maybe from a abstract painting background. Maybe it's more about having a textural quality to things, or they might be coming from graphic design background, or exploring typography. And yeah, it's just the whole visual language of graffiti is just like, over the past 10 years, I'd say in particular, has really expanded. And it's almost not even, there's some artists that don't even just stay in the realms of graffiti now in terms of their intent and also context and their language. And they bridge into other areas of art, because there's a lot of people that don't just say they're a graffiti artist anymore, but they also have like a studio practice, and they're exhibiting in galleries and doing public or private commission work, and that's really evolved.
And the reason I guess I kind of bring this up and ask you that question is because it's a really important conversation for us to rethink and recontextualize the position that graffiti holds. Its influence is undeniable. Its ability to have been a key instigator in so many other realms, I think, is really important. And it's sort of there's an ongoing aspect of it being maybe not dismissed but marginalized in a lot of these conversations. And I just think it's important to get that kind of rundown and to acknowledge that there's a really complex formal aspect that it needs to be celebrated alongside the really important socio-political kind of aspect that graffiti comes from as well. So those insights are really important. So yeah, I thank you for that. I'll move on to Jesse because it's kind of a fitting one. And I want to sort of say this in the right way, but the move on to Jesse is because, Jesse, you would probably admit that your background is not in the world of graffiti in the way that it is maybe for Bobby or the other guys on the panel. And yet your work, I think, synthesizes really well, both with graffiti art and also as a public art form as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background and how you've navigated, I guess, that emergence into the urban landscape with your art? What changes have been necessitated, and how it's sort of maybe impacted the rest of your practice?
I mean, how far back do you want to go?
All the way back.
We need a more comfortable couch than this. Oh, that's a big question. We'll just go right back to the start. It was a rainy Wednesday. Yeah, pretty much. It's funny listening to everyone else because it gets me thinking about like what my path kind of looks like, and whether that's sort of straightforward or it's meandered in lots of directions and it's taken lots of tangents. But like it all adds up to what I'm doing now. But it's looked quite different at different times. I picked up drawing as a kid because I was quite bored. I spent a lot of time by myself. I was the youngest sibling, so all my time was spent doing what everyone else was doing, and I had to find something that I could sort of take with me. So that became my little, my little drawing folder that I'd take to watch my brother's hockey games, and it became like a really nice way for me to have my own thing, and to sort of escape, and I could sort of go into my own little world. And even like right from the beginning, I've always been interested in like observational drawings. When I started, it was like Dragon Ball Z characters, and I'd print them off on the computer, and I'd spend all my time trying to make them sort of look perfect. And in that sense, I created my own little sort of world, even though it wasn't something that was discouraged in my family, but I didn't have an artistic family, so no one really knew what to do with it. They sort of just let me follow that. And then by the time I was leaving high school, it just sort of seemed to make sense that I'd go and do something creative. I don't think it's a great idea to let 18-year-olds decide to get $40,000 student loans, but that's somewhere in the background. I moved city from Hawke's Bay. I moved to Wellington to do a design degree, and I learnt stuff while I was studying from my tutors, but I was also doing a lot of learning outside of that. And when I moved to Wellington, that was really when I became aware of like kind of what graffiti was, and I was thinking about trying to just define sort of the essence of graffiti. Like, I think we think of graffiti often as like a noun, but when you spend time in that community, you see it as like a verb. Like, graffiti is sort of like an act. So like the people I was hanging out with were doing graph, and I was going to parties at Maggie Chop's Gallery in Wellington 2010, where all the like graph artists and street artists and muralists were having their exhibitions. So I was picking up all these skills that didn't necessarily come out of my work, but they were all sort of there, and they were all kind of building up. And then there was a long time, after I finished my design degree, where I didn't really have an artistic practice, and I was probably quite depressed for a few years. I didn't really know why, and it was because I wasn't painting. And I really picked that up again when I moved to Christchurch, and was sort of encouraged to do some exhibitions. And so suddenly I was painting again. I was teaching myself how to oil paint. I was trying to exhibit. I was working in studios with other people, and just letting myself be inspired by the people that's around, and sort of seeing where that took me. And eventually it became really obvious to me that like the graph scene in Christchurch was really prolific, and I started meeting all these people. I was still just painting with a paintbrush, and I think I started telling people like, I just want to do some bigger works. I want to do some bigger stuff. Like, what's my next challenge? And I think the first thing that kind of showed people that I could even paint on a larger scale was a piece on the Berlin Wall, which is just down the road. It's changed now, but that was, it was one of those things. Like, I felt like everything I was doing, I was agreeing to things before I really knew if I could do them or not. I was like, I can paint a 3-meter wall. I think I own a ladder, So I go out there with my like giant piece of paper, which is lots of pieces of paper stuck together, to put a transfer stencil up. And I'm like, I think I can do this. And it turned out good, sweet. So, Ruben has another job that comes up, which is portraiture based. My oil painting works, informing me to be more hyper-realistic and kind of understand that bit of that side of portraiture more. Honestly, it's one project leads to another. I don't know where I'm going. This is graffiti. Shift exhibition at the museum, which was
2023.
2023. I met more people who were slowly influencing me. And I got to a point where there were people who I wanted to collaborate with. One of those was with Icarus, who's pretty well known in the graffiti scene in Christchurch. He kind of like holds a lot of it on his shoulders, really. And so we did a piece together in the museum, and it became really obvious after that, like, this is where it's at. Like, everyone I like is in the scene, and I want to be able to go out and paint with other people. And I'm still using my little brushes, and it's just taking too long. All these little techniques I hadn't figured out yet, but I could see what I kind of wanted to do, and I just was trying to figure out a way to get there. And so one day I think I got paid for a job, and then I went and spent all that money on spray paint. and then I like doodled around at home for like a couple of weeks, and then somebody invited me to come paint with them. And when, you know, the most renowned crew in Christchurch asked you to come paint with them, you're like, oh fuck, I have to do something really good. Otherwise no one's going to want to hang out with me. So yeah, like a little bit of peer pressure. Yeah, and so maybe my journey to that has been quite different from other people's. Like I maybe started at an opposite end a lot of people did. But I think what I did was I built relationships first, as opposed to doing the thing and then meeting the people. Like I already had people who were like, you're okay, you can hang out. So yeah, I just had to kind of catch up technique-wise. So yeah, this is maybe like month 6 or 7 using spray paint. And you know, my mural I painted was like ginormous, and I didn't really know what it was going to look like. But yeah, I don't know, just some.
And it's phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah, just kind of trusting the process. Like I've put time in with my artistic practice in other ways, and it has all contributed to this, as opposed to like picking up a can and being like, I've got no fucking idea what I'm doing. Like I actually do. I do know how to put, you know, put a painting together. I know how to, you know, compose something. Yeah, does that answer your question? I can't remember what the question was.
It does.
We had to go back. We had to get deep.
We did have to go back, and we've now come forward.
Great.
One of the things that really becomes apparent, I think, in you retelling that path is how you possibly have a really strong view of this whole experience as part of community. And that might not always be the case for someone who maybe is sort of isolated or going, you know, and sort of working in isolation. How big a difference is that sense of community from maybe the experience of painting in a studio, you know, where you maybe, I think you had a great term for what you do, like when you're locked in
goblin mode?
Goblin mode.
Yeah.
So you know, so
painting like this.
So how, yeah, that must be a marked difference. Is it something thoroughly unique to your experience with artists from this urban art world, that sense of community?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think it is a big change, going from like the safety of your studio, you know, which having worked in shared spaces and then like having my own little space at home and thinking like, oh God, I really prefer this because like, you know, people can be a bit much when you like work alongside them. And I think sometimes when you're making stuff, it's really good to just like go away from everyone else. But then the coming back and then having to discuss ideas is just as important to finding a balance. I think I was missing balance. It was like, yeah, either working in a screaming studio with 30 people or, you know, at home by myself. And yeah, once I started to sort of feel like I was part of this community, but I wasn't actually like, I wasn't contributing, I wasn't painting in it. I was like, well, I'm friends with all these people. I need to get in there. And that's been really awesome, because I think like maybe my art journey, part of that, and being, you know, confused about what I'm going to do like next year, and like what does work look like for me, and like what's my job and what's my passion, and a lot of those confusing things were maybe because I was spending too much time alone.
Maybe.
I do have a dog. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's sometimes if you're, you know, there's self-discovery and painting. But if it's, sometimes you just need other people around, like somewhat to ground you and, and to hold you up as well. Yeah, and I think that the graph community does that. Like I've been so welcomed. It's like bizarre to me, how great everyone's been. It's been actually like kind of nurturing, and I've brought my own style into it, and I think that maybe that's refreshing for people as well. Like I'm more of a character artist than letters, and like people get real hyped on that shit. So,
I mean, we've talked a little bit about maybe not so much in this conversation, but I've had conversations with many of you about the idea of mentorship and the passing on of knowledge. You already highly technically proficient in your art making processes, but how much help do you get from that community, like in terms of just insights into, you know, the unique aspect of aerosol, the approach to, you know, how a character might sit alongside graffiti pieces and things like that? Like, has that technical and sort of, I guess, compositional kind of insight been forthcoming, as well as sort of just that embrace and that bringing you into the space? Has that helped you develop?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, some of it's active stuff. So people are, more than happy to help you out, and you've got questions about, technical things, or even just, asking everyone what kind of paint they prefer. Everyone has feelings about that, and in caps, and just watching other people paint and just being allowed into this world and to see everyone technically do their thing, is you learn a lot. But I guess for me, a lot of it is just sort of passive influence that I've been gathering. It's all led me to this one moment up here in front of you guys. No, I mean, I'm someone like, once I moved from, Napier to Wellington, suddenly I lived in a city, and it was, I was walking around every day, and I got, totally addicted to, you go through town after a weekend and you see like who's gotten up in a new spot, and like notice different letters, and some of that's, composition. You're like, oh, I love the way that person's like put that thing there or whatever. So I have, I understand a lot of, a lot about graffiti aesthetically, that I've picked up over time. Yep. And so I've just kind of forced my way in, slotted myself in there.
The other thing I wanted to ask you was that transition, I guess, of your art from the preserved space of the studio and the gallery into the public space where work is much more ephemeral. And I guess if we're, say, speaking about Bobby's experience, like a tag is always likely to last a short period of time. Just the nature of it, the response it engenders from authority and the way it's intended is different. How big a transition has it been for you, for you to be able to sort of put your art in the public space, knowing that its longevity will be significantly different from a studio or gallery-based work?
I suppose like once I've painted something and it goes out into the world, whether, even that's a studio, like I don't know where that goes. Like I don't really know what its life after me looks like. And like I suppose like one thing about or people who do graph that I've really enjoyed and like understood always is like the compulsivity of it. Like just like making because you have to make. And it's kind of easy to think like, oh, I've transitioned to this or that or whatever, but like I'm just someone who has to make stuff because like I'm more of a little freak if I don't, so I like have to get it out. And the starting to use spray paint's been great because I can go out in a day and I can do something start to finish, whereas in a studio you might come back to it and work on it weeks and weeks, and that forced like the forced time frame is like, I think is like so good for you as an artist. It's sort of been painting outdoors, and just you go out with people and you got one day to do something. It affects your style because obviously I'm not going to do some hyper realistic painting in a day, so I've been able to paint different stuff, and that's meant that I've been even like my drawings have changed because I'm not drawing to then do a 200-hour painting. I'm drawing to do something that's going to take me 6 hours. So it's been like great for just like my creative output. I can't remember what the question was.
That's fine. That answer's great.
Ephemeral. Well, it's funny because like when I write about my paintings, my in-studio paintings, a lot of I don't really consider them portraits. They're not necessarily of people. They're of little moments, and I want my paintings to feel like the figure in the painting might be like about to get up and go because she's like done, or like move, or like I feel like a little snapshot. So like in that sense, like that studio practice work I'm making is sort of, it's meant to feel ephemeral, and then the stuff that's out on a wall that's going to get painted over in a week or so, like that actually is ephemeral. So it really doesn't bother me. I think I like that. I like that idea.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessie. You've taken us all the way back and brought us all the way back forward. So, Ling, I've seen you over in the corner, like almost trying to anticipate what's coming at you. We'll keep it sort of, I think an area of expertise. You've a city that is regarded as one of the street art destinations in the world, urban art destinations in the world. How do you compare the Melbourne scene with what's happening here in Ōtautahi Christchurch?
So I was thinking that this question would come up. The simplest way I could put it is, to that point, Melbourne markets it hard. It's a tourism thing. It drives, industry, which, whether we like it or not, graffiti, street art, murals, has grown globally and is now an industry. But at the same time, for the amount of output Melbourne has, it's not supported, not the way it is here. And here it's across murals, it's street art, it's graffiti, it's the whole community. You can kind of feel a lot of support through these events, and it's well represented. You see it in the streets. If you go and walk around the streets of Melbourne, you'll see a lot of nice pieces, and there'll be street art and there'll be bits of stuff here, but not like this, not saturated. You're going to have to get out of the city to see the best stuff. There's still benefits to that. Melbourne has an amazing community which has been forced to probably be more successful, from an insular point of view. Everyone's independent and just doesn't have to, they just do their own thing. But you shouldn't be forced to do that. There should be that greater level of support. And Melbourne, particularly from a political point of view, kind of likes to shit on it. It's very easy to say, we hate tags, we hate graffiti, we're gonna, we had to clean this much, we don't like that, there's nothing good in this. By the way, can you come look at our city and check out our amazing artwork that those same artists produced? But that doesn't sound nice as a media piece. Having that actual genuine support would be, is probably the big difference that I see.
And that's a really important insight, I think, that a lot of cities, right, are picking up with this power of muralism, the positive impact of muralism, and actually where they're falling, I think, is not understanding and not embracing the whole package of all of this culture that roots are in graffiti culture, that is fed into everything else, and there's an interconnectedness, right, that has to be acknowledged, has to be celebrated. And in fact, by trying to segment that, you're creating a tide against what you're actually able to achieve in a way. And I guess it would be probably quite surprising for people to hear that's perhaps one of the problems in Melbourne, is that holistic view is not embraced as much. How have you navigated that in your personal experiences as someone who comes from that graffiti background, but also is obviously in the mural space? You're in one of the most sort of well-known studio spaces in probably in the world because of that status of Melbourne. How have you navigated that experience of maintaining those graffiti roots and I guess in your own way advocating for graffiti's importance?
So maintaining it's never really been a problem, because it sort of speaks to that, how compulsive it is. You just do it, and then once you've done it, do it again, do it again, do it again, and just never stop. But through that, you need work ethic. Really well-known, successful graffiti writers particularly, they have to put in insane hours. Even if they're working a job, they're working another full-time job on that, which is graffiti. It's at times to your own detriment. The amount of relationships or conflict, things that come into that. So for me, I take that same sort of approach to producing work. People go, oh, okay, well, so what are you doing for a job? I've got to go paint this mural. Okay, what are you doing after that? I'm going painting. Okay, and if it's raining, it's like I'll be in the studio, and then the rest of the time, that's with family. That's it. So that means that I've never had a problem in terms of, I guess, generating work, which creates community. You meet more like-minded people. You then connect with more people, which then enables you to generate, jobs and, you know, commission work, and, you know, everything that I do now, you know, it's all just through that painting and painting and painting. The people that have taught me processes for painting murals, background in graffiti, you know, my first studios were more focused on that, and then that has bled into meeting more and more people that were maybe more of a street art based, you know, background. And now, as that's changed further and further, I'm meeting more and more people that come from fine art backgrounds, or, you know, completely self-taught, whatever it may be, and that, you know, creates wider networks. I mean, it's global, and then I'm learning more and more and more to generate, you know, more ideas, concepts, learning ways to actually, you know, take stuff from just an idea to actually in the real world. So, you know, moving into like sculptural pieces, and, you know, how does that work? How do you sell a sculpture? You know, it's so, yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but.
No, but it does. I wasn't saying no. I was saying that as a joiner. But yeah, that point about, you know, how do you sell a sculpture? So how big a benefit has it been having spaces like those studio spaces, having those cross-sectioning sort of experiences, where you're working with different people from different backgrounds, working at Everfresh? How much easier has it made that experience for you to move into sculptural works, to move into commissioned projects that are often public art projects across that board? What, I guess, at the heart of this question is what is the sense of community like in Melbourne? What's a day like at Everfresh for you? And yeah, how does that play out in your trajectory?
So probably the biggest benefit, and I didn't know it at the time, it's only, you know, in hindsight that I can look back, you know, at these studios and see how they've helped me, is that, you know, you end up with mentors. You know, I didn't know they were at the time, but you look back and go, I learned how to actually cost out a job properly, or, you know, I learnt that idea from here, or I was stuck on this, and someone, you know, I was able to sit down with a coffee in the studio and just be like, hey, I'm having trouble here. Like, how would you approach this? And get a different perspective. And when you've got, you know, a dozen amazing artists in the one place that are all, you know, sharing ideas and thoughts and different views on, you know, the world as a whole and their art and everything else, that's going to impact you in a positive way. Because, you know, if it was just me at home Googling stuff, yeah, I'd be just probably producing something that's just a variation of someone else's work, not my own.
So talking about all of that, I guess, also leads us to what's happening, what the work you've all been producing for this festival is. And I wanted to stay with you, Ling, and talk about your work that's been produced. I'm not clever enough to have the slideshow align perfectly. But for those who don't know, Ling's work is painted on the side of Child's Sister on Manchester Street. A wall that, you know, presented challenges. Those of you who know it, it's a pretty complex wall. But it displays a series of portraits. And I wanted to ask you, not just to tell us a little bit about the portraits you've produced, the subjects that you've chosen, including a familiar face on stage, but also how portraiture has come about as one of your creative avenues, and does that outlet relate to your background in graffiti art as something that also speaks about identity?
It wasn't intentionally something that related to graffiti. It was, you know, through graffiti, I've always been drawn to trying to push to do larger pieces, nicer pieces, and that extended to including characters. And, you know, being an 80s and 90s kid, I always just painted a lot of pop culture. Started doing a lot of, you know, 80s WWF wrestlers, yeah, which is a lot of fun. And it meant that I could put little bits of myself out into the community, which is awesome. You know, probably slightly selfish, you know, but, you know, quickly learnt that, you know, if people are similar, you know, same vintage, you know, they'd get around the same sort of jokes, the same funny things that I liked. But that developed this particular skill set where I really enjoyed, you know, painting portraits. It's something innately human around it, and it was also even just the like an experiment in the from the reactions you get painting in public. If I was doing a piece, you'd sketch up all the lettering, people would see a jumble of lines, wouldn't understand it, and then as a result wouldn't like it and be like, oh, you do graffiti. But if you're doing that same piece but then sketching up a character next to it and there was an eyes, nose, face, people would be like, oh, you're a real artist. I love this, and by association you kind of Jedi mind trick people into liking graffiti. But then as I've painted more and more portraits, developed my own sort of approach to it, it's made me reflect on who I want to paint and what I want to paint and how I go about that. And particularly when I've got the time to actually produce my own imagery and reference photography to paint, I want to celebrate particular people that reflect my values, and then how that has changed over time. So on that wall, I painted Cairo, but we're saying how he grew up as a graffiti writer, but he's a proud dad. He's a great person as a whole, not just as an artist or anything like that, and that's worth celebrating. And most people are going to see that and not be aware of it, but I know that I can do that for myself. But it's just a nice way to interact with the world as a whole.
Yeah, I mean that's a really nice way of putting it, right? Like paint the world, the good of the world that you see around you, in a way. Do you want to talk about the other subjects on the wall, so alongside Kaito as well?
Yeah, so there's May in the middle, who's one of the owners, child sister, and it's been absolutely lovely.
And how many kimchi grilled cheeses have you had?
Enough, because I'm not sure if you could ever have enough. But, yeah, I'll be back tomorrow. And there's also Elias, who again, he's proud father, does martial arts. He's an artist. He's one of the first people that supported me, in Christchurch, in terms of providing a wall. Even that in itself, the collaboration we did, was the Maori Poppins character, and he said he got a really strong response from that. And the whole time I was like, is it okay that I'm painting this? And he's like, it's okay because you're working with me. And then that enabled him to then have conversations, good and bad, with his own community, and learn more. And so, we're able to enable that, which is, again, that sort of stuff is, I think, worth celebrating. And so, as soon as I knew that I was going to be over here and painting portraits, then he was the first person I messaged.
Yeah. And that reflects something that we were talking about earlier, which is that kind of path that you follow, because you were saying that there's every chance you're not sitting on that stool tonight if you didn't paint graffiti with bursts 20 years ago or however long ago it was, and that sort of created another connection. When we were doing the museum exhibition, you happened to be in town, Bobby introduced us, you became part of that exhibition, then we've stayed in touch, and then you've ended up as part of this. So, that idea of celebrating not just good people but our own connections, in these places seems, even more important when you reflect on it like that, right?
Absolutely. I think was it 2007, 2008? I think when we first met to go paint graffiti, and then became friends, stayed in contact this whole time, fallen into an art career. I definitely didn't mean to be a career artist, and then that's developed over time, and then making other connections through that. I think it was pretty much a complete fluke that I was just in town when shift was on, and I was in town and it was like, oh, you're here, you need to meet Ruben, you need to come paint.
So we've known each other for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
Are you going to paint a portrait of me? It's on camera.
Yes.
Right up.
That's good.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask about is stylistically, your portraits have a really painterly quality, right? There's the sense of the kind of urgency of brushwork, and they're kind of built up. There's almost a sculptural kind of quality through the brushwork. How did that style develop? Is that a reflection of any kind of graffiti influence or other influence, or is that just something that kind of has been refined and honed over time?
Probably both. Definitely working with spray paint impacts how you paint. So I like how fast it is and sort of chopping away at a character. But through painting portraits, that's kind of led me back into having a studio practice. And what I found was often that people's studio practice and their public practice sometimes didn't align. I was really conscious of trying to keep that link, even though I don't use spray paint in the studio. I use heavy brush strokes, and I wanted to try and mimic that on walls. So, I'll often use chisel caps that kind of act like a flat brush. Yeah. And that's, but it's still with that same speed of graffiti, that's still very impulsive at times, where I'm just like, putting a line there. Yeah. And not really sure why. You just feels right.
Yeah. So there's an intuitiveness. It also allows you to probably adapt to different surface qualities and things like that as well, right? Because it's not as dependent on the primed, smooth surface like the wall you're painting this time has probably been made more possible because of that painterly style, would you say? And the use of aerosol in particular.
Yeah, so say a wall like that, which is got a lot of layers, a couple of bumps, turns into a construction site.
That digger's not destroying the wall. Like it looks like it, but it's further away than I think it actually looks, right?
Yeah, but it's very good, because if you worked purely with brushes or something like that, you might shy away from something. You would look for a smoother wall, something that's a little bit easier. Spray paint doesn't care what's in front of it.
Yeah.
You just push the button and it goes on.
Yeah.
And if you do things big enough, it should go over the gaps.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I want to move on to Jessie to talk about her work now. So thank you, Ling. So Jessie, your image is made of a recurring character in your work, a figure that you return to regularly, Ophelia from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Do you want to talk a little bit about the reason that she is a character that you choose to paint regularly, and how your kind of version of Ophelia in your mural for Flair changes the narrative a little bit?
Sure. I do recognise a few of you from the tour, so you've sort of heard my little spiel about Ophelia. But in Hamlet, Ophelia gets dumped, and she's just a totally normal girl, so she's like so distraught, she just walks into a river and presumably dies. She comes up in pop culture a bit when someone's trying to make a point about the sort of quintessential, stereotypical, like hysterical, like they're often like poorly written, or if someone's trying to kind of subvert that, they're using her to kind of like point out just kind of how ridiculous it is. And there's been a few renditions of her, both paintings and in film, that I really loved. And yeah, it's just sort of like snuck into my work at some point. Some of it's aesthetic as well, because I like to find ways to contrast detailed areas with really flat areas, and water is a really like nice way of doing that. Like you can have a figure coming out of water and put no detail in it, but yet your mind kind of understands that they are sort of sinking into something. When I'm not sure how it sort of played into doing it as a concept for this. I'd just been doing some sketches, and I saw my wall, and I had this thing in my mind, and I wanted something that worked well in that space as well. Something really punchy, so it's basically just part of a face and a giant hand. I think where you get to kind of see that wall from that composition has a really big impact. In my version, the water she's sinking into is made up of the names of all the headlining artists from this year's Flair and from back in 2022. Well, I mean, originally I just thought that leaving a giant blank space on a wall that's in an area that gets heavily tagged is sort of like a terrible idea. And then I started thinking about how I could, like bring other people into my piece and have it feel more collaborative. And, you know, most of the artists have either, you know, a straight out or a strong graffiti background. I thought if everyone can send in their graffiti throw, which Bobby was talking about before, so it's got, you know, all their names, all their monikers. And so I reached out to everyone. They sent me a drawing, and then I incorporated it into that piece, which actually turns out is quite a lot of admin. Even just reaching out to like 12 people is like quite stressful. I was like, God, what have I done? Someone's not going to get back to me, and I'm going to have to leave somebody out. So it makes it feel more collaborative to me, and also I think is a nice reference to just sort of the culture, and that wall having been painted over many, many times. I didn't want to feel like I was just sort of turning up to this space and kind of like ignoring everything that's come before it and like slapping my own shit over there and just kind of walking away and being like, thanks guys, it's all about me now.
You also have painted earlier with a phone in a hand, which I think is really nice.
So this is kind of my contemporization of my Ophelia figure. Is she's sort of totally nonchalant, and there's all this sort of chaos going on, and she's just on her phone. She's probably like live streaming it or something, you know, or like posting some ambiguous thing like, oh, I'm just slowly dying, but like, don't message me about it. Yeah, and I think, you don't need to know who Ophelia is. Like, people have come by and just looked at it and been like, oh, that is so true. We're just on our phones too much, you know. So I think, like I like art history, and I like that reference makes sense to me and sense to other people. But you can still turn up and just see the image like for what it is aesthetically. Like, I don't need to be too conceptual in my work. Yeah.
So you talked earlier about, you know, one of the driving factors of sort of painting outdoors or painting on walls was the desire to go larger. This is your largest work.
Yeah, you know, go big or go home.
Yeah. How satisfying is it now to look at that and see your work at that scale? How well do you, I mean, this is rhetorical because I know it looks amazing. Yeah, it must feel pretty awesome to see it at that scale and understand how well it works.
Yeah, there's sort of two sides to that. Part of it is like today I kind of decided that I was finished, so I went home really sad, like post-piece depression, you know, where you're never going to be happy with it, and like up until that it's got potential, and then it's sort of finished and like, oh fuck, I could go back and I could shade that more. But yeah, the scale was a challenge. Like, there's just so much space, and like I said, with using spray paint more, I've actually sort of been slowly, my style's actually been simplified a lot more. But then doing something on this scale, it's like, well, if it's that massive, it would end up being like a lot of flat space if I'd simplified it. So I've sort of merged the styles of what I have been painting with spray paint and what I would usually paint in my studio practice, which is like lots of pedantic details. And just tried to work up layers of paint to sort of create these sort of almost kind of gross skin textures. Yeah, and just sort of build it up really slowly. And yeah, it was sort of a process of it growing. Like, I didn't really know when it was going to end or how long it was going to take. I just sort of like feel it out and see what it turns into.
And I think, you know, again, I'm not clever enough to make the slideshow sync to our conversation, but you'll see in the photos those sort of stages that building up process goes through, where there's the sort of flat layers, and then it builds up, and then all of a sudden by the end you've got this incredible kind of tonality and sort of realism, I guess, as well. That process for you is challenging, I'm assuming, because you aren't using the same tools that you've developed that style, all right? How important is it for you to balance something that echoes your studio work with something that embraces the peculiarities of outdoor work?
Well, I think like if you make a lot of stuff over time, you end up with a style whether you're like trying to get to it or not. You have certain themes which come up in your work over and over again, and I do like emphasizing certain elements of a figurative work that maybe other people wouldn't. And maybe it's just in how I blend, like I was saying, like making those like real kind of gritty like skin textures. Like if I ever photograph someone for a reference, like I say, like don't wear makeup. Like I want all that stuff. I want all that good stuff. If you look tired, it's even better. There's a kind of like almost like a realness to it. And I don't know if that's reactionary to like every photo you see now is like run through a filter. And I'm like, no, I want to go back.
Yeah.
I want to feel like I can like feel the little bumps on your skin. I don't remember the question. The medium, how important? Yeah, I don't know. Like, I just think like sometimes just letting a medium be what it wants to be is like you learn a lot from that, and not trying to. I didn't want to like just try and emulate my studio practice as much as possible because I'm still learning about this new thing. So, yeah, I didn't know what it was going to look like at the end. I was just like, I'll keep going.
It looks amazing, and it's so striking. It draws you into a space that most people will walk past. I think that's one of the biggest powers that art in the streets can have, right? Is to surprise the unexpected or the unexpectant and draw them in. So, well done. It's amazing. So I'll move on to Burst. So, Burst, you touched on this yourself, talking about the idea of sort of graffiti as an non-institutional system of knowledge and learning, I guess. And that is the subject of your PhD thesis, right? That sort of idea that this is an informal learning system, I guess. How does that experience, because obviously you have also gone through that institutional system, both as an artist and also as an academic with your education, is that how you frame it? So how does that idea manifest in your practice? Or do you think you are sort of uniquely different from maybe people whose learning has been more completely non-institutional?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I think one thing that I've noticed, aside from having studied for 14 and a half years and knowing that kind of educational world, I also previously was teaching art and design back in Tamaki for 12 years at Unitec. And I think what I've kind of observed maybe over the past 5 years is a lot of the students that graduate typically get into it for financial reasons. Not saying that you don't want to make a career and make money out of your art, and that's all fully legitimate. But I think for me, there is a passion and a hunger and a compulsion that kind of comes with graffiti or street art or maybe even murals. And that kind of purpose drives us in a different way than maybe a person that's come through art school. I think, I don't know if it's the resilience that you described as, but I think we've all got it in us to just get on with it, and nothing's really going to stop us. If we don't get the projects, or we don't get the commissions, we don't get paid, we don't whatever, we're just going to plod on through anyway. And that's maybe just what creatives do. But I think in terms of the knowledge and things that I've learned from graffiti, as maybe different from the fine art world, is probably painting in public space. I find this, what you said before, the question around studio practice and operating in a public space, I think that's a really unique point of difference within this kind of urban art realm, because when you're out there painting, you're obviously really opening up your process. You're dealing with the elements, you're dealing with scale, everything under the sun, and it takes a certain sense of courage to operate in that space. Whereas, when you do operate in the studio, you have a sense of comfort. Whether it's, you can pack up whenever you want, or, you run out of this color, you can just go get it from the shop. But sometimes there's those limitations when you're out there working in public space, that you don't have that, ability to go, get something just because you want to. But yeah, I think working in public space it's really challenging, and it's also gets people to redefine and rethink how public space can be used, you know, whereas I think when you're maybe coming out of an institution and you're trying to go into the fine art gallery world, maybe you're operating in those kind of art world rules. You know, like someone else is dictating what your value is. You want to sell your painting for this much, nobody buys it. Okay, well then your artwork's not worth that anymore. You know, if that's what you wanted to do. But I think that now that I'm kind of, well, have been operating in that space, I've always been a believer that I want to be the one to kind of dictate what my value is of my art. Yeah. And I think that's a really, you know, not that it's purely monetary and financial, you know, as a way to describe what value is, but you know, that's how the art world operates, right? Oh, you're a valuable artist because you sold your artwork for $1 million. But I think, yeah, just not subscribing to that is the first maybe process of becoming more creative and free. Maybe if that's the right way to describe it.
Which becomes really interesting as it becomes, you know, part of a career pathway as well, right? There is an interesting dilemma, I guess, that artists face when you both have the opportunity to make a career, sure, but also you desire the freedom of not having those attachments to your creativity as well.
And I think that's a really interesting one, because when you think about the fine art world, sometimes people that, you know, they create a body of work, and it might be portraiture or landscapes or whatever, you get recognized for that, and people buy that. You know, if you've got a gallery that's representing you, they might want you to keep doing that, but maybe you're not interested in doing that anymore. But for the purposes of making money, you might just end up doing that for the rest of your life, because that's your, you know, that's your income maybe, I don't know.
Well, and that leads me to your specific work for Flair, which is a great example, I guess, of the adaptability or the adaptation of graffiti art into large-scale muralism. Sure. At its heart, your work is still around letterforms, yes, the manipulation of letterforms, the incorporation of other design elements into letterforms. And yet it also sort of breaks with some of those traditions by not being an individual name, but being a place name. Yeah. So what was your thinking around that concept?
Yeah, so typically within graffiti, people are writing their own name. You know, it's to be seen, and in the places that they put their work. But in my particular work, I basically wrote Otatahi, which obviously is Christchurch, and really the intent is to create a bit of a landmark work where people that live here and people or tourists that come through can have something to be proud of. You know, it's a landmark space where people can get a picture in front of and be proud of their city, you know, because this is what it is. And incorporated into that text as well is some aspects of fauna and flora, which I have a huge interest in, and I just kind of like the forms, really, and I try to turn them into motifs, and then I try to integrate them into the letters, and the letters then kind of become the foundation for those shapes and forms that I create. And in the background, aside from graffiti, I'm also, you know, a huge comic book, you know, cartoon, tattoo fan. And so there's a lot of aesthetic elements that I draw from those subcultures as well to try to incorporate into my work. And that's probably where the more illustrative kind of components of my drawing style come from. Yeah.
And how important is it that graffiti is afforded that representation in its true traditional form within the context of these festivals and large-scale commissions? It's something that still, I think, there's room to grow, and I say that because I think, you know, this is an art form established for, you know, over half a century with its own sort of rules and stylistic language that we've already talked about, and yet we still feel that actually a graffiti artist is validated by being able to paint something else. Yet if we just take the formal qualities of graffiti, celebrate that, put that on that platform and celebrate the unique visual language that's been developed by generations of young people around the world. That's the most important way, I think, one of the important ways to flip the discourse a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think generally speaking, if we're talking about just to the general public, you know, Ling, you mentioned like if you paint a piece with your name, people generally like maybe dislike it, but the moment you throw a pair of eyes, nose, and a mouth, they're like, oh, that's so cool. I think that's like a global thing. Yeah. I do think it's a global thing, but I also think that there is a double-edged sword with graffiti, because there is the good and the bad, you know, in the sense that there is the more vandalistic parts and then there is the more artistic parts. So you're always going to have to grapple with those two, but I think with the Flair Festival, they've done an incredible job with having a great representation of all aspects, and you know, incorporating graffiti, you know, getting artists that come from those realms and not to be involved to create, you know, some diverse, you know, work. And yeah, there's I mean, one thing that probably keeps me involved in graffiti is always going to be my interest in pushing letter forms, you know, just like a typographer has an interest in creating their own fonts or typefaces, you know, it's that kind of same interest. And there's so many different styles within graffiti as there are with painting, you know, that are around the world. And yeah, it's the more people we bring on board to celebrate this visual language, you know, the better chance it has to maybe become more socially accepted, if that's what we want it to be.
Yeah.
But also there is a subversive nature to graffiti, which is anti-authority and blah, 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 you know, you can't read it, you know, which makes it unique too. So, yeah, you could argue for legitimizing graffiti in that sense by including it, or maybe not, and it continues to be rebellious, which could be a good thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, Fluoro. Your work over on Cashel Street is beautifully built around the phrase, I look to the hills. And I thought you surmised really beautifully how that phrase gains its power from its sort of evocative nature. It's not necessarily about one fixed meaning, right? Can you talk a little bit about your intent behind using phrasing and leaving some open-endedness to them?
Yeah, so I like to use pretty much letter forms in all my work. But yeah, I guess I kind of just go with whatever comes to mind and feels right, which sounds kind of weird, but sometimes I don't have like a specific meaning necessarily, or I might find out later what the meaning was, or even when people were like, tell me this is what it means to me, then I'm like, oh yeah, I think that is what it meant, but I don't always, I'm not necessarily trying to communicate what I think or what I see, or it's more just because I don't think that people will necessarily, even though it's words and people were like, I feel like people think, oh, if you write something, it's just a specific, like an obvious message rather than a picture maybe, but
like there's sort of a more intentionality behind a phrase.
Yeah, I think it can, like, because everyone has a different lens through which they kind of view the world, they're always going to have a different take on it anyway, so I'd rather people it resonate with people in their own way, and yeah, I don't know.
And that I guess is something that kind of resonates probably for nearly everyone on stage, right? Is that making art in public space, whether it's commissioned or not, there is a sense that you give up the power of authorship a little bit, and you have to allow the public to interpret work in their own ways, because everyone has a different experience when they're standing in that space.
You lose control of the work as soon as you put it out.
Yeah.
So I think being too precious about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want it to be for everyone. Like, I want anyone to see it, no matter, not just a small group of people. And the people that see public works are from completely different places and walks of life and stuff. So they could have like a real different take on what it means, and I quite like that. And then maybe kind of, as Bobby was saying, like you kind of get used to being misunderstood in graffiti too, and I'm not really that. Maybe I should be more concerned about people understanding it, but I'm not. I'm kind of not. I don't.
Yeah.
Oh well, if you don't understand it, I don't. It's probably more palatable because it's like pretty colours and whatever, but I kind of I prefer to use graffiti style letter than most people want the script style, which I kind of do as well, but because they can understand it more, I guess, but I don't have that much interest in doing that. So
how much did, I guess, sort of Bobby's comments resonate then in terms of the balancing act between legibility and the letters and the phrasing visually being an image of intrigue as well? So there's the reading of the text, but then there's also the reading of the form as well, right? Like your letters are always interesting, and they're not stock standard, right? They're kind of quite elaborate, but distorted. How does that all come from that sort of background of graffiti?
yeah, I think so. I think like I actually. Maybe it's like the energy of something that's more important, or I would like to work towards like abstracted letter forms, like that people really couldn't. I'd never thought that I'd be that interested in it, but I like how just form and colour and things come together more than, which would then, I guess, make it less obviously understandable, but yeah, I'm more interested in that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question. But.
No, definitely. Well, we'll come back to Cairo now, to Hazza. Thank you, Holly. Feels like a long time since we last talked.
It has been.
So, and you touched on this as well, and I said we'd come back to it, and it's probably a good way as our sort of final conversation. So the process of creating your work has necessitated a conversation, a discourse with the Māori Advisory Board at ARA, and ensuring, I guess, that the work is an appropriate one for place. That becomes a very important part of your work, right? And something that you're now really coming to understand that importance and work through that process. How has that process been in this work, and what elements of your work have, I guess, most needed that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's really healthy to like continuously allow yourself to be educated. I think if you find yourself in a stance that's too strong and you refuse to move, it can be self-destructive. So I always allow myself to be educated, and in this case, in which you're talking about, the consultation process. I spent my whole career not asking for permission. I've gone about things just because I see a need to do it, and you don't really kind of take into consideration what anyone else thinks. And like the only thing that I'm really giving up is my freedom, but the result is the art that people get, whether they like it or not. So to go from not asking for permission to consultation being at the front of the process is like a huge shift, but I also have to think that I've grown as an artist, and where I'm at, although my background is graffiti and I'm presenting myself as a graffiti artist, this is a public mural event, and these works go outside of that spectrum to the fact that you actually have to consider the community's opinion, because these pieces exist here and they have to see them every day. So there's like a different contrast, and I can still go and make graffiti and I can still not ask for permission, but it's sensible and appropriate, I think, to consider everybody else's input. And particularly in the space, I think when in this Māori space where they hold a lot of tikanga and they're very strong with their morals and values and they want to make sure things are done appropriately, it is crucial that I think consultation takes place. A lot of these sites were here before before the Westerners arrived, so they still have value in a lot of these places, and they want to make sure that the artwork that sits there enhances that, and there's no conflict with it. So yeah, I was like really blessed to be put in touch with the team at ARA, and they kind of revised my design and sort of, we had a hui about it. They wanted to just make sure that I was connected to what I was trying to say here. And yeah, that we met on a mutual ground, and then I reached out to them when I got here and sort of said, look, I have what this piece means, but it's in English, but I don't want this piece to carry a Pākehā name. So, you know, we were able to work with them to change my my English meaning into Māori kupu, and so I have what it means, but it was them that named it. And it means that, once again, you know, this is a community project that gets to exist here, and they get to take ownership of it. I'm not a stranger that just came in and said, you know, look at me, and which is, you know, very typical, I think, of a graffiti lifestyle in which, you know, you ride the ego train, and it's always me, 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 me. And that's how you kind of gain that fame in the world, to just being respectable in the spaces that we've been given an opportunity to paint.
Yeah. So that leads directly into the development of the work and the message of the work, which is a really beautiful one, and one that I think the city of Ōtautahi will really appreciate and value, because I think you have tapped into something really meaningful. You were saying before that it started with the whakatauki. What was that specific whakatauki?
I can't recite it, but it's basically around this idea that, you know, if you sift through the cracks, you will find the treasure. And it's very specific to Ngai Tahu. It's a Ngai Tahu whakatauki. And I think this is part of the learning curve. You know, this is all new to me, so I don't even know who to consult with. You know, there's not really a yellow pages out there for this kind of situation. So I thought that it would be right for me to sort of just take it upon myself to find something local, and it crossed paths with them, so they kind of wanted to challenge that. And when I arrived in Christchurch, I felt a bit more uncomfortable with it, and I sort of just found something on the internet that I really liked, and I wanted to respond to it. So I went back to them, and I wanted to work with them along the way, and we slightly changed the meaning of it. And also, you know, once I landed in Christchurch, I realised that, you know, the message I wanted to tell with this piece of artwork, at no point had I considered if it was traumatic for the people that have to view it. So even that, you know, I had to think about that, and that's the job that comes with storytelling, is you have to really be considerate, and I've learned that, you know, for me to tell an honest story, I have to kind of open myself up to be vulnerable, and you know, which opens the way to be compassionate and empathetic, and yeah, it's there's stories of honesty, but I think they really matter in these communities. And yeah, so once I got here, like I said, you know, I never really considered the people that have to view it. I just considered what I thought would be something special. So it kind of went from talking about an event that, you know, with the Christchurch earthquakes, I wanted to talk about, from my point of view, the admiration I have for the city and their ability to rise up through it, and you know, that's what the piece talks about. But you know, it just keeps saying this is like, you're just talking about this thing, like, you know, they're trying to move on from it. So yeah, I wanted for it to be less a tribute about what happened here, and more a show of admiration that I think me and probably everybody else outside of the city has for this city.
Yeah.
And the way that they've dealt with it, and even from an art point of view, their ability to recognize that it was art that kind of aided the city into a positive direction, to make sure that art was, you know, a critical pillar in the city's vision to, you know, their restoration.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you, because I think it's a beautiful work, and I can feel that message that comes through, this idea that there was a need for resilience, but also the idea that there's always something to take from tragedy as well. I see it as a really valuable addition to our urban landscape, and I think the fact that you have undergone such a process of consideration and reflection adds to that as well. So from on behalf of the City of Ōtautahi, I want to say thank you. And I want to say thank you to everybody sitting alongside me here as well for the time this evening. I sneakily took a look at my phone and realised that we've been going for quite a while. Everyone probably could have watched the prequel trilogy of Star Wars, but it didn't feel that long to me. So it's been a real privilege to listen to you all, to share those insights with you, and obviously a massive thank you for what you have given the City of Ōtautahi, what you've given the Flare Street Art Festival more broadly as well, much like Ling was talking about with the portraits, and not just the artwork, but as people on the ground here who have shared and given and contributed a lot. So thank you very much. Let's give them another round of applause. And lastly, thank you to all of you for coming along tonight and sitting in. And you'll probably want to stand up and stretch your legs, but these types of events I think are really meaningful, and they add another layer to this experience. So thank you to everyone who's helped make this possible. Corbin, Callum sitting on the sound desk, Selena obviously for all your help, and the Duck Central for your help as well. So thank you, good night, go well, and we'll see you next year.